Chapter 13. Shadow Goes to the Dogs. I woke up the next morning on the floor in front of the dead fireplace, my head on a sofa cushion and an Afghan draped over my naked body. God damn it, we missed it. Oh, I was so looking forward to that. Okay. It had been what the fuck am I reading this book for if it's not even going to give me some hot woman on cat action? That's all I want out of life. It had been ages since I slept on the floor, so I expected my body to ache, but it was so thoroughly pleasured, it was apparently ignoring the hard mattress. Shadow was in the shower, bellowing happily. I joined him. God, it's. Our breakfast was a bit delayed, but we had hearty appetites. I took our dirty dishes into the kitchen and brought some more tea. Shadow was staring out the dining room window. That man, he said, the one waving his arms, he comes to the park every day. I looked. I think he's doing his exercises. I've seen him before, too. So many people come to the park, Shadow said. It must be a wonderful place. Except for the dogs, of course. I smiled. Do you want to take a look? He had given me a great deal of pleasure, after all, so it only seemed fair to pay him back. In an instant, the man of my dreams had brought my jacket and pulled me down the stairs and out the gate. But then he stopped. I could almost feel the quiver. Dogs, he said. There were 2 on leashes at the doggy water fountain at the entrance to the park. They're not loose, I said. The thing is, you'll see lots of dogs here because one of the only dog runs in the city is at the east end of the park. Dog run. Yes, a place where owners can remove the leash and let their dogs run free. Often the dogs ran free on their way to the dog run, but I saw no reason to frighten Shadow needlessly. We can look at the other end of the park if you'd rather. I led him to the entrance. Something to read, he said with obvious delight. There are things to read everywhere. This thing to read was a sign describing the park horse fitness trail that had been constructed in the 4 or so blocks of green space that made up the rectangular park. The various exercise stations were spaced more or less evenly, except for the area devoted to the heavily populated dog run, along a wide tarmac path that made a loose figure 8 through the park. The crossover was directly ahead of us. They say this is good for you, Shadow said. Do you do these exercises? I did once, I said, meaning one time, not regularly in the past, although I didn't mind if Shadow drew another conclusion. Once, in this case, had been enough. What's an apparatus? He asked, still reading. It's like, well, a machine or... I pulled at his hand. Like this, I said, leading him a few feet to the first stop. In this case, the apparatus consisted of a tall post and a T-shaped bench. The post was intended for warm-up stretching, but more often it served as a place to fasten balloons and other signs directing visitors to parties inside the park. The benches were for sit-ups, but mostly people sat on them, singly or in groups, to talk or have a bite of lunch. Shadow, however, had decided to take the apparatus much more seriously. Each piece was accompanied by a poster, most of them faded, torn, gouged, or all 3, describing in words and pictures what was to be done at each spot. Clearly delighted by the opportunity to display his reading comprehension, Shadow did his stretches and sit-ups faithfully before taking my hand again and heading out across the loop that joined the 2 circles of the figure 8. It was a beautiful sunny afternoon. Kids were running in the long meadow to the left, and elders were taken to the benches on the rise to the right where they could watch. You could smell perhaps not roses, but flowers and other natural things. All was right with the world. Shadow, too, seemed to be caught up in the pleasure of the day, to say nothing of the adventure of trying out all the apparatuses. By the time we got to the lake, his face was just a bit pink from the exertion of the chin-ups and push-ups and sit-ups he'd done en route. My face was a bit pink as well, from the pleasure of watching him. There was a historical poster at the lake's edge, and I was prepared to provide a lucid but eloquent history of how Spanish soldiers had first camped on this very spot, moving on to some choice tidbits from my store of local anecdotes. But Shadow paid no attention to the sign at all. Birds! He exclaimed, and then, what are they sitting on? Sitting on? And then I saw the lake as Shadow saw it. On this perfectly calm day, the surface was so smooth it might have been a large blue-green plate. A lake, I said. This is the mountain lake that gives its name to the park. What's a lake? A large body of water, I said, and instantly felt my mistake in the sharp squeeze he gave my hand. What's next? He said, tugging me along. Although its features weren't designed for someone his size, the children's playground delighted Shadow, especially the slides of various steepness reached by ladders of various heights. And he seemed to delight the kids. The mothers, however, were less delighted by the image of a middle-aged male stranger cavorting with their tots. Several tugged or shooed their little charges out of what I suppose they thought was harm's way, and in no time the volume of their concern, expressed in Russian and several Asian languages, began to rise. Worried that someone with a cell phone would summon police, I disappeared slowly down the path toward home, hoping Shadow would follow. He caught up with me sooner than I'd expected. That was a lot of fun, he said. Why are all the little kids in one place? Don't they like the other apparatus? Actually, I said, these apparatus are just for the kids. They're supposed to leave the rest of those things to adults. That's a rule, like stopping at red lights? Well, nobody gives tickets, but yes, it's a rule. Actually, the grown-ups are supposed to stay off the kids' apparatus, too. I see, he said, falling silent. I thought perhaps I had offended him with my veiled criticism, but his thoughts were off in another direction, as usual. Which one am I? Which one? Yes, he said, making a show of his patience. Am I a grown-up or a kid? I'm only 5 years old, after all, which would make me a kid. In fact, I believe I should be starting school this fall. On the other hand, I certainly don't look like a kid. I look probably 25 or 30. I believe that would make me a grown-up. I stared at him in astonishment. People have an inner self who never ages, I've always thought, and so we tend to see someone younger than when we look in the mirror. Obviously, the same was true of cats. Shadow was quite handsome and well built, like the man whose shape he'd taken, but like the man, he was probably the other side of 50 and looked at least 40 years of it. I think we should consider you a grown-up, I said, politely omitting my commentary about age. That's the way you're perceived, and perception is everything. Shadow nodded, but his head had turned, and I could see his thoughts had caught still another train. Dogs! He said, with disgust, sniffing loudly. Ow. I had thought it had been the loveliest kind of serendipity that we hadn't run into one yet, and as I looked around, I still didn't see any. Shadow had walked a few steps beyond me, and was moving the branches of some low-growing shrubs. Look at this, he complained. Dog poop! A big mound of it! Why, it's still warm! How disgusting! I was thinking that at least it was off the path, but I felt it would be rude to point this out. Dogs are such dirty creatures, he went on. They don't know how to keep themselves clean. They slobber when they drink, they make an incredible ruckus when they eat, and, as you see, they don't even have the courtesy to bury their poop. It's amazing they've survived this long, he concluded. Such an obviously inferior species. I wonder what the author's view on dogs is. Let's find out, shall we? As you might imagine, since I own a cat, or did at one time, I prefer them to dogs. Hallelujah, holy shit. Still, this outpouring deserved some reply. Dogs are very nice companions for children, I began. They're playful and loyal. Shadow shook his head, indicating that I was making no progress. Anyway, there are little boxes every 100 feet or so in this park with plastic bags people are supposed to use to pick up after their dogs. It's really the owner's fault if their dog's poop lying around. Now I had his attention. Plastic bags? he said. I looked around, and fate had placed one of those boxes nearby. I fetched a plastic bag and illustrated. We put the bag over your hand like this, I said, holding it high. Then you pick up the turd. I bent over and did so. And invert the bag. The turd's inside, and your hands are clean. Shadow hooted. People pick up their dog poop? Well, they should, I said. At least in public places where someone, Shadow was off, virtually dancing down the path ahead of me, laughing all the while. Even then, he stopped to do the balance beam, which was only a few inches off the ground, but still beyond my skills. Shadow pranced along it without a misstep, never looking down once, and finished by running across a few round logs that edged the path. The man of my dreams danced right past the place where we were supposed to leave the park, and headed along the path leading to the dog run, turning from time to time to wave at me and show me how much fun he was having. Then, abruptly, he stopped. When I caught up with him, he was standing in front of the message, "Entering dog run," painted on the path, but even I could smell them in the air. When 3 dogs, unleashed, came up another entrance onto the path and preceded us towards the run, he put me between himself and the dogs, and I could feel him shaking. "You know, Shadow," I said over my shoulder, "you're bigger than I am now, and I'm bigger than most dogs. You're a man. You don't have to be afraid. They're just dogs after all, an obviously inferior species. You might find this interesting." He came alongside me. Of course. "Let's take a look." His stride was bold, but he was holding my hand. As we made the turn into the meadow, which was shaped like a shallow bowl, Shadow was gripping my hand so tightly I was afraid the knuckles would crack. In a flash, each of the 9 or 10 dogs on the lawn dropped its bone or ball and turned in our direction. Fur bristled, teeth were bared. There were growls and barks in various keys, and a couple of dogs began that little dance that says, "Better back off, lady, 'cause I'm getting ready to charge." Considering the response, I wondered for a moment if I was really holding the hand of a 6-foot-tall celebrity look-alike, or the furry paw of a large, long-haired gray cat. I looked up at Shadow. His face had gone pale, and he seemed frozen to the spot. I linked my arm through his to give a bit more control and started forward. "Alice," a friendly voice called. "We haven't seen you in weeks. Is this why?" I recognized Hester, a petite and cheerful woman of middle age, with a kindly old golden retriever named Jack. Actually, he was quite a bit paler than Gold at this age, but he was the only dog that hadn't responded yet to Shadow's arrival. He was lying calmly at Hester's feet, with mouth open and tongue lolling out in that smile-like expression of the nicest dogs. "This is Sam," I said. "He's staying with me for a while. Sam, this is Hester." "How do you do?" she said, with a smile extending a hand in greeting. Leaning practically from his knees so he could take her hand without getting any closer to her dog, he said, "Nice to meet you." Shadow had already learned the art of the social lie, I thought proudly. "And this is Hester's friend Jack." I couldn't resist. "Jack is a very sweet dog, and he's feeling better now. I can see that." I reached down and scratched the old guy's floppy ears, as Jack helpfully maneuvered himself into an upright position. "Isn't he cute, Sam?" Sam, or Shadow, was frozen in place again. "What's gotten into these dogs today?" I asked no one in particular. "Well, it was good to see you, Hester. I'm glad Jack's feeling well again." As we turned to go, the dogs, suddenly a pack, made a barrier of their bodies so that we were pinned in a narrow space against the benches where their owners and handlers sat. The path was blocked in both directions, and the barks and growls continued. Although they slept in different homes at night, this motley crew of canines had instinctively managed to mount a common attack. The closest dog was still a few feet from us, but they were circling warily while their owners gave ineffectual commands. "Quiet, Rex. Be a good boy." One dog, a young boxer whom I particularly disliked from previous walks, decided to lead the charge from the rear of the park, barking shrilly as he came at us. Just as instinctively, I stamped both feet in succession and waved my arms. "Shoo!" I yelled. "Bad dog!" Smoothly, as if he had planned it that way, The boxer made a hard right 3 feet in front of us and returned to the pack, which now backed off a foot or so. I felt Shadow close behind me. "Do that again," he whispered in my ear. "Shoo!" I hollered, with less emotion, stamping one foot. "Go play, you guys. Leave us alone." Then Shadow was beside me. "Shoo!" he said. "Bad dog!" He stamped his feet and waved his arms at them. Their ears were laid flat, and the dogs backed off still further. The path was clear now, but Shadow was just beginning to feel his power. "Shoo!" he repeated, stomping across the path towards them. "Shoo! Get lost!" Most of the dogs turned tail and loped away, but Shadow seemed ready to pursue them all the way to the hedges that separated our park from the Presidio golf course. "There's no need to do that," one of the owners said, grabbing Shadow's arm before I could. "They're just being dogs. They're not hurting you, so why be a prick about it?" I smiled at him as I took Shadow's hand. "Well, you might think about doing the shooting yourself next time. Then you can decide how much is enough," I told the outraged fellow. "Let's go, Shadow." I could hear the muttering behind us as we left, but all the dog noise had stopped. "You were right," Shadow said as we passed downhill and out of everyone's sight. "That was very interesting."